to admit when I'm wrong. T'Challa here showed me there was more than one way to reallocate the universe's resource.
It's done. At last.
Number 10. What if the Hulk had the brain of Bruce Banner? This one is so low because these days that's just a thing. Well, it happens on occasion. But back in 1977 when this What If was released, this was still novel. This issue was actually the second ever What If. When you get into the issue, it's even more specific. In this universe, Bruce Banner has always managed to keep his mind, but people are terrified by his monstrous form. So even though he tries to talk to people, they all just run from him, convinced he is a mindless monster. Thankfully, Rick Jones and Betty are by his side, and it turns out his transformation is like a nightly werewolf kind of deal, at the start at least. Banner by day and Hulk by night. Betty takes Hulk Banner to meet her father, who ultimately accepts him even if he is, quote, a big green hulking brute. So for a while his life is great. He marries Betty, who loves all parts of him and lives a domestic life. He goes on to help the Fantastic Four cure the Thing, Ben Grimm, which causes them to disband because they decide without the Thing's strength there's no point being a superhero team. I think they're overestimating the Thing's importance, but that's just me. I mean, I love him, but strongest member of the team? Maybe physically. I mean, you all know how I feel about Reed, but give him some credit, 1977. Come on now. So hear me out. This all ends up in Reed, Xavier, and Banner fighting Galactus and taking him down with an advanced version of Cerebro that merges them all into one person called X-Man, who defeat him with their sheer mental force, but at the cost of their powers. More happened. That was actually the Cliff Notes version. It's a really solid story, and so much more goes on than the title would have you expect. They explore this concept a lot today, but there's a real charm to this one. Number 9. What if Professor X of the X-Men had become the Juggernaut? Just take that question in. I love it. This one comes to us from 1990 and presents a very different universe. In this world, Professor X becomes the Juggernaut and is buried alive. And because of this, there are no X-Men to defeat Magneto, who is instead taken down by the Fantastic Four, which causes a wave of even more intense anti-mutant hysteria, made all the worse when Xavier digs his way out and takes over the entire country. Nay, the world. His interference causes World War III and nukes are launched, which ends up creating more mutants, which does nothing to curb Xavier's reign of terror. And because of this, he brings together his X-Men, but to help secure his rule. Since this is a reversal, Kane, Charles' stepbrother, is found by Magneto, who has formed Asteroid M as a safe haven to plot. He's joined there by the main X-Men, Cyclops, Jean, Colossus, Quicksilver, and Scarlet Witch, who wish to overthrow Xavier as well. The best part of all of this, though, is how they take Charles down. It's the 90s, the very beginning, so things aren't quite as extreme as they're gonna get, but they still deal with this by launching Charles into space. Fantastic. The X-Men then set out to repair the damage to the world, and all I have to say to that is good luck. Fear in this scenario? Justified. Number 8. What if the Invisible Girl had died in childbirth? I feel like you couldn't do this one today, not just because it's dark and depressing, but in the modern era the edict is very much that families and children are unrelatable and scare readers. Which is a fallacy, but whatever. Let's go back to 1983, wherein Sue is pregnant with the couple's first child, the eventually to be ridiculously overpowered mutant Franklin. They're undoing that a bit in the 2018 run, and he now has black hair, but that's not important. What is that in this world Sue dies in childbirth, which is, well, that's too real. It happens, I don't know, I find this story bold. Maybe it's because I had a kid and that was always low-key a fear in the back of my head. So Reed comes back, but not in time, because he was dealing with a nihilist, and the loss of Sue completely unhinges him, and he seeks revenge on a nihilist, killing himself and a nihilist in the process. This one is good, but rough. Also, I can totally see Reed doing this. He may neglect her, but if she left, he'd burn the world down to the ground. Number 7. What if Captain America was revived in 1994? Okay, so last time we asked the scintillating question, what if Captain America was revived today, with today being the 1980s? They learned their lesson, kinda, because now they've given a direct year. So I give you Captain America in the 90s. Scratch that, they learned nothing. The cover still says what if he were revived today. We need to do this again, same title, updated cover. Alright, in 1994, for reasons that are loosely justified, but I'll let them have it, the Earth was plunged into more wars and horrors post-World War II, and ultimately the Red Skull triumphed. Heroes rose and were defeated, and nuclear Armageddon was launched. All of this is told to Steve when he is awakened by Doom, Liberty's last hope, as he calls himself. Doom enlists Cap to lead his elite squad of characters we know mostly as villains, i.e. the Juggernaut. He claims he wants to take back Red Skull's America. However, it turns out that Doom was lying. He rules one side of the split world, Red Skull the other, and he's tricked Cap. Thank God there are heroes still about fighting, just waiting for Cap to come join them. This one's a two-parter, so we have the redemption for involuntarily evil Cap in part 2. Number 6. What if Gwen Stacy had lived? The death of Gwen Stacy is a pivotal moment in Spider-Man's backstory, and just a landmark moment in comics in general. Some people take issue with her dying. I personally never did. Side characters die, and anyone who says Gwen didn't have her own stuff going on, I have to question how closely they were reading Spider-Man. That was some shade, but I don't care. And honestly, I would rather have had her do nothing ever than that awful Norman Osborn baby daddy retcon they pulled. Anyways, in 1980, the world was graced with this what if. In this story, Peter not only saves Gwen, but reveals himself to her and proposes. However, it still doesn't work out for him. This is cause Norman's not done with them yet. As Goblin, he gives a tape revealing Peter's identity to J. Jonah Jameson, so it gets leaked, and Peter has to go into hiding to protect his loved ones. But at least they're alive this time. Hooray! Number 5. What if Matt Murdock had become a boxer like his father? So this one comes to us from issue 102 of the second run, which began in 1989. Here, Matt Murdock's father threw the match, just as the mobsters wanted him to, so that he could have money for Matt, who went off to college to become a lawyer, still met Elektra and was trained in combat by her. But ultimately, she goes off on her destiny, and Matt's life takes a turn. His father gets put into a coma after a fight gone wrong, and Matt takes up boxing to pay for his hospital bills. He ends up working for the Kingpin, at least until he tells him to throw a fight, which he just won't do. I mean, that's beyond the pale. So in doing so, his father gets killed, which causes Matt to don the persona for the first time, and he tries to take out Fisk, but ends up being saved by Elektra. So what's crazy about this one is how much sense it makes, and the fact that it just reads like a retcon rather than a what if, which shows that interesting line that these what ifs walk. This one is okay, but not that far out of the box, so yeah, number 5. Number 4. What if Green Goblin had the Infinity Gauntlet? This comes to us from the era wherein what ifs are no longer single issue questions, but rather a collection oftentimes centered around a pivotal event in the Marvel Universe. So 2015 brought us What If Infinity Dark Reign number 1. What if Green Goblin had found the Infinity Gauntlet? Cause remember, in comic continuity, any person can wield it. Doesn't even matter. The issue opens with a flashback of a young Norman cowering from his abusive father, only for his father to be transported away to witness a fully grown Norman with the gauntlet wipe out the Avengers and the other heroes and usher in his Dark Avengers. However, really this was a memory, and Norman has summoned his father forward in time to talk and show him the world he has created, with the gauntlet, a dark utopia. And he then shows him the thing he is most proud of, an Emperor Joker-esque simulation wherein Peter must relive the death of Gwen Stacy over and over and over. Upon seeing this, his father is horrified, claiming that he's a monster and he should have strangled him when he had the chance. So, Norman uses the gauntlet to make his father proud of him. However, it all rings hollow, and he ends up vaporizing his father in a fit of disgust. And because this issue follows the same time travel logic of almost every other work except Endgame, this causes him to vanish, having erased himself from existence. Number 3. What if the Avengers had never been? From the third ever What If in 1977. The Avengers in this timeline are shattered by the departure of the Hulk, feeling that their team will never be all it could be without him, and also that they need to find him and stop him. So the team actually disbands. No Hulk, no Avengers. Thor goes back to Asgard, and the Wasp and Ant-Man leave to live normal lives, while Tony enlists Rick Jones to look for the Hulk. The Hulk still ends up teaming up with Namor and challenging the Avengers to a battle, just like the 616 verse. However, here, due to their shattered confidence, Tony has to build armor for the remaining team members, and try to convince them to go and fight the Hulk. Which they do, but not before some dramatic tension. Here's the thing though, Tony dies here, and the Hulk, well, he stops because Namor starts beating up on his bestie Rick Jones. So ultimately, the remaining members become the Armored Avengers, in honor of Tony's sacrifice. Number 2. More suffering for Tony, with What if Iron Man had been killed instead of Captain America? From 2008/2009's What If Fallen Son, answering the question, what if Tony had died on the courthouse steps and not Steve? Because Steve didn't actually die during Civil War, really, it was at the end of it. It just kind of felt like it all happened at the same time because it was winding down. It was just poor timing. Civil War is a thing. Because of all of this, it made people feel really divided about it. The reason he was shot was a plot to put the Red Skull's mind into his body, so there's that. Anyway, what if after Steve is sentenced, Tony is confronted by Tom Foster, who blamed him for killing his uncle, so he kills him. This reignites support for the Superhuman Registration Act and puts heroes on opposite sides once more. Of note, Miss Marvel beats up Luke Cage for saying he wished he'd got to Tony first. You know, back when writers remembered they were friends, and he was instrumental in helping her overcome her alcoholism, but you know, retcons. With the the world in turmoil, the Skrulls head over to Earth for their invasion unnoticed. And number 1. What If Volume 2 Issue 100, an issue full of madness and some silliness that has a bunch of those one-off throwaway jokes, and one is quite glorious. What if Peter Parker had been bitten by a radioactive sheep? Why then, he would be Sheep Boy. Now for me, what I love isn't just the sheep logo in the corner, or Peter chowing down on some grass, but rather the little self-aware dig that calls it part 1 of 80 of the Sheep Clone Saga. Also, guest villain The Wolf. Sometimes these jokes hit, and sometimes they don't. Also, humor is really subjective, so maybe a bunch of you thought that was really lame, which I'm sure you'll let me know down below. Number 10. What if the Ghost Rider, Spider-Woman, and Captain Marvel were villains? Now this issue comes from 1979 and is actually clickbait. Oh, so much clickbait. So with a title like that, you may assume, oh my god, so they all team up and are evil? But actually it's 3 separate stories about what would happen if each of them were a villain. Captain Marvel is the most realistic, wherein Yon-Rogg destroys himself trying to take out Marvel, which leads to Marvel being promoted to commander of the whole Earth invasion, a change that ensures he is never swayed away from his Kree-born viewpoint. In Spider-Woman, she actually is never freed from her Hydra brainwashing and lives life as a fugitive. Number 9. What if Aunt May had been bitten by the radioactive spider? So this one is obviously a comedic based one, and is what was deemed a backup issue. So the comic would have a main story and then a smaller one to fill out the rest of the issue. Usually a weaker idea that wouldn't be able to sustain itself for a whole issue. So the perfect space for humor based fare. This small tale comes to us from 1980, and was the back issue of What If the Hulk Could Become a Barbarian. If you were here for part 2, you remember the Conan one. The 80s had a thing for barbarians. This Aunt May tale is actually really sweet and happy. Ben doesn't die, hooray! And May takes up a life as a costumed crime fighter. The best part is definitely the little Miss Moffat costume with the bonnet and the skirt, but all with the same Spider-Man pattern. Seriously though, May is an efficient hero who springs into action and has a real desire to help the city, that in no way needed to be spurred on by the death of a loved one. It's also pretty funny that her big concern is that Peter is too frail for her to fight crime and take care of him at the same time. But it's pretty clear she wants to. She's tasted that sweet, sweet action, and was bitten by the adventure bug. Forget a radioactive spider. Number 8. What if Captain America were revived today? This one is amusing to me because it's very of its time, that being an era when yes, retcons happened, but only when people felt they were really needed. They weren't hanging them out like flyers on street corners the way we do today. So this outing from 1984 sees Cap revived in the 80s. Oh wow, the zany, the leg warmers. What's nice is that Bucky was with him, pre-Winter Soldier Bucky, so child Bucky. Gee willikers, I'm totally not Robin Bucky. So for the most part, Captain America just does his thing. However, when on a talk show, he talks about how he's a bit disillusioned with how some of the younger generation don't seem to love or respect America the way people did in the past. This Cap is obsessed with being a paragon, someone for people to look up to. He also gets involved in politics, and ends up getting involved in riots and racial tension and supporting martial law. However, surprise, he's not the real Captain America. He's a communist imposter. The real Cap was still on ice, and is revived into a world of martial law and people fearing something called the Sentinels of Liberty, and he is appalled by what he sees and the suffering of the masses. So he teams up with the underground to fight his doppelganger. This one is interesting, showing different ideals and the ones people fear he could have and the ones people believe he should. Captain America is meant to be an ideal no matter when he wakes up. A concept kept true to this day. Number 7. What if the Fantastic Four battled Doctor Doom before they got their powers? Confession time, I love the Fantastic Four. They're my favorite superhero team, even though Reed needs to take several seats. He's a jerk, but he's my jerk. So I love alternate tales featuring this team, and this one is hilarious. So we all know the source of the Doom-Reed rivalry. Reed tells Doom that his calculations are off for his experiment, which he's conducting to try and rescue his mother's soul from hell. Doom doesn't listen, and Ben Grimm messes up his experiment, so it all goes wrong and it blows up his face, scarring him. Badly or mildly depending upon continuity. But in this What If, all of that happens, but everyone feels really sorry for Doom, so he gets to stay on at the university, nursing his hatred for Reed. He uses his time there to steal Reed's tech and launch himself much earlier on the track to becoming Doom. However, the stolen tech he gets still doesn't help him save his mom, and Reed saves him, but this just makes Doom angrier, leading to a confrontation before the team is even formed, so pre-Fantastic. It's good, read it. Side note, I feel like I'm halfway there to being a Fantastic Four villain. Like half of their motivations are just hating Reed. So I've got that, I've got the hair, I'm ready. Like no one can kill Reed but me. I already feel that way. Career decision made. Number 6. What if Namor had joined the Fantastic Four? This one comes from 1990. So in this story, Sue manages to convince Namor to join the Fantastic Four, rather than continue his war against humanity, and he's instrumental in helping them defeat Doom. Being around Namor all the time, who actually pays attention to her, Sue loses interest in Reed and falls for Namor. This causes Reed to leave the team in a fit of jealousy, so he gets his own lab and hires an assistant, who he falls in love with, but joke's on him, she's a plant by Doom. Doom's blackmailing her. She ends up helping him to brainwash Reed and send him against the Fantastic Four, but Reed's lingering love for Sue prevails and he breaks free. They defeat Doom, Reed marries his traitorous assistant and has a daughter, and Sue marries Namor and they have a son, and the two grow up and fall in love. Hooray! Number 5. What if Spider-Man never became a crime fighter? So unlike Aunt May, Peter always needs a cataclysm to get his butt moving towards heroism. In this tale from 1980, Peter decides, why not stop that burglar? What's the harm? Which means Uncle Ben never dies, and the people at the studio see him do this, increasing his celebrity status. So he becomes a television actor and eventually just an actor on the big screen. He appears on late night talk shows, the whole deal. All of this fame goes to Spidey's head and he decides forget college and science, he's meant for the big time as an actor. After revealing his identity to May and Ben, they express great disappointment in his choices, but Peter doesn't care. He's ready for his close-up. A life of glitz, glam, and terribly coordinated dresses. Spidey then goes on to sign more and more heroes to his franchise. The Avengers, the X-Men, all with the promises of good PR and that they will be viewed as true heroes by the public because he's staging fights. So he becomes a producer tycoon, altering costumes, making reputations to make the world a safe place for vigilantes and also to line his pockets. However, Jameson is against Spider-Man, angered that these fake heroes are thriving while his son, who he views as a real hero, died because there was no hero to save him. In the original continuity, John Jameson had been saved by Spider-Man. Because of this, Jameson insists upon giving Spidey and his heroes bad press, and well, Spidey can't have that, so he fakes a crime syndicate being run from Jameson's office, which leads Jonah down a path of crime that all ultimately culminates in Peter learning that with great power does indeed come great responsibility, and a ridiculous spider over the bed in your spider mansion. This is legit one of my favorite what ifs. Producer Peter with an ascot is an image for the ages. Number 4. So this is a comedy what if called What If the Watcher Was a Stand-Up Comedian, and it's chock full of one-off jokes and short stories. This one comes to us from 1982, and one of the highlights is, what if all the superheroes who now live moved to Toledo, Ohio? We then see all the heroes sitting around with nothing to do, so feel offended if you're from Toledo. There were no supervillains constantly tearing up your town. Also, let's be real, if all the superheroes who now live moved down there, the villains would definitely follow them. Half of them are driven by personal vendettas, so moving isn't gonna stop them. This issue is silly to the max. What if Thor had a Swedish accent? What if Tony Stark had owned an auto plant instead of a weapons factory? What if Alpha Flight talked like TV Canadians? That one hurt me. I won't even talk like a TV Canadian. Number 3. What if Iron Man was Dr. Doom? So in this, Tony Stark was sharing a room with Victor Von Doom in university instead of Reed. This of course could only lead to disaster, and it's Tony who suggests the change to Victor's formula, and it causes Victor to approach him to be his partner, but really it's so that they can swap bodies, so that he can be Tony and Tony has to be him, so that Victor can have all the advantages that being a Stark provides, like the resources, etc. At first, Tony and Doom's body, falls into a depression and into the bottle, but he then decides no and pulls his life together, works hard, goes back to school, builds his rep, and is the best Victor Von Doom he can be, and ultimately creates tech that even rivals Victor Stark's. That's Victor and Tony Stark's body. They also both create armors, with Victor creating a green Iron Man armor that looks like the Iron Lantern armor and Tony building Doom armor with a red cape, just so we don't get too confused. The two battle, and ultimately as Tony Doom defeats him, Victor Stark offers him his body back. Trade back, come on. But Tony and Doom's body doesn't want his original body back because Doom has tarnished it too much. He opts to remain an altruistic and maroon Doom. Number 2. What if the Punisher became Captain America? You know you're interested, that title has you hooked. This tale comes to us from 1993, so you know it's extreme to the max. So after being injured badly, Steve Rogers is out of commission, and the government is scrambling to find someone to be Captain America. For some reason, they skip right over Falcon and decide that of all the people, they pick Frank Castle, a pre-Punisher Frank coming out of Nam, who's going to be getting the B-grade version of the the super soldier serum. At first he says no, but changes his mind after his family is killed in that infamous gangland shootout. As you can imagine, he's still very much the Punisher, even still using that persona while on the Avengers, sneaking out to punish criminals. Super secret. Hush hush. Eventually Steve confronts Frank while he's off punishing and tells him he has to change his ways to be a better man, the symbol America needs, because Steve can't do it, because he's got a metal arm now, and I guess America's not ready for that? They need a fully flesh and blood man. Steve's logic, not mine. The patented Captain America speech works, and Frank turns over a new leaf and decides to try Steve's brand of justice and embrace his role as Captain America. And at number 1, what could be crazier than Captain Punisher? Well, what if Spider-Man had not lost his cosmic powers? Coming at us from 1991. So after finding out that he still has cosmic powers, Spidey retires, cause with cosmic power comes no responsibility. Venom tries to take him on, but well, he can't beat Cosmic Spider-Man, so he accepts Peter's offer to replace him as Spider-Man. Good deal. Way better than death. However, Spidey can't resist helping out, but now on a global scale, flitting from disaster to disaster, growing more and more disconnected, Dr. Manhattan style. He's approached by Doom, who claims he can rid him of his cosmic powers, but it's really a Doom bot trying to steal them for itself. But it can't contain all of that energy and explodes. So Spidey is able to use the deep power on himself and gets rid of his cosmic powers and his Spider-Man powers, so it's finally time for Operation Normal Life. Except MJ's pregnant, and she got pregnant while he was cosmic, so their baby, Power City. No rest for Peter. No rest.
Number 10. What if the X-Men had lost Inferno? This very chaotic and fire-filled demon horde-infested story comes to us from What If Volume 2, issue number 6. And we are starting it off hot, friends. This is quite a dark story. Here we get to imagine what the fate of the world would have been like had the X-Men failed in defeating Madeline Pryor during the events of Inferno. Instead, she and Sim take over the planet Earth, unleashing hordes of demons on it and ruling it together. However, the heroes who have survived their reign of terror manage to band together and, using their power, fight back. In the end, they do win the day, but not without casualties. Wolverine himself in the story ends up becoming the pet of the Goblin Queen, and Sim fully giving into his feral rage and feeding on the innocent. Ugh. He only becomes free from the fog of his rage after he kills Kitty Pryde tragically and realizes the monster that he has become. Number 9. What if Captain America were revived today? 1983. Because there's another one of these from like, I think 1994, so yeah, but that's in volume 2. We're going to volume 1. There are actually a few different stories involving Captain America being revived in the modern day or simply evolving with time as it passed. So 1994, and I think there's also another one of them which might even be on this list. But in this What If from volume 1, issue 44, we get a darker take on what a modern day Cap could look like in the 80s. This version of the hero ends up turning America into a heavily monitored and policed country during his witch hunt for communists. Fortunately, as dark as that all is, we learn that this isn't the real Captain America but an imposter that took his place after he went MIA. The real Cap returns and battles it out with imposter Cap, but in the end, the real Captain America turns to the people of America to undo all the damage done. He asks them to take responsibility, as while they were led to this point by a false version of him, they also allowed themselves to be led falsely. It's honestly a really good speech that even today rings true in a lot of ways, at least for me, and it provides the silver lining and shining hope for an otherwise pretty dark tale. Little grains of hope, that's all we need. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want more what if lists, be sure to let us know by giving this a thumbs up, sharing it, doing all the things. Also, if you want more what if content, we do have a playlist now for that. Yay! Number 8. What if Wolverine killed the Hulk? In issue 31 of the 1977 What If series, we find out what would happen if instead, when Wolverine first met the Hulk, he had killed him. Wolverine goes on to celebrate his victory against the big green Goliath after killing him, having some drinks and throwing some punches like he usually does at the local tavern. However, in the end, things get out of hand and he accidentally kills one of the patrons in a rage. When he seeks help from the military to protect and defend him, they actually turn their back on Wolverine, and so he ends up joining the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. He becomes a sleeper agent for Magneto, infiltrating the X-Men. However, when Magneto finally plans on enacting his his plan to defeat and capture the X-Men, Wolverine has a change of heart, feeling as though he has truly found acceptance and a family with the mutant team of heroes. He battles Magneto one-on-one and the two kill one another in the end. It's a pretty tragic tale. Basically all what ifs with Wolverine I feel like are usually pretty sad. Pretty sad or pretty dark. Number 7. What if Captain America had not vanished during World War II? See, another Captain America story because I love these. This story comes to us from issue 5 of volume 1, aka the 1977 What If series. While Captain America does not get trapped in the ice and Bucky never goes missing, presumed dead, only to become brainwashed and repurposed by the Soviet Union as the Winter Soldier, a worse fate seemingly awaits both of these heroes. Neither having ever disappeared, Steve goes on to fight as Captain America until he eventually retires from the mantle, becoming instead the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Bucky ends up taking his place, becoming the new Cap, as we have also seen happen in modern comics, and Rick Jones ends up becoming Buck's new sidekick, also going by the mantle of Bucky. Because I guess Rick or Ricky just doesn't have the same zing to it? Sadly though, Cap Bucky ends up dying on a mission, and Sharon Carter, Agent 13, who had hoped to settle down with Bucky after his final mission, blames Steve for his death. She actually accuses him of robbing him of his childhood and putting him in danger. Pretty intense. And then of course it ends with Rick volunteering to become the new Cap, so the deadly cycle it seems is destined to still continue in this timeline. You'd feel like after that all happened, Steve might be like, maybe we won't do that again, it didn't go great the last time. But he's just like, ah yes, Rick Jones, now you will be Captain America and probably die. What if the Green Goblin stole the Infinity Gauntlet? This story comes to us from the What If Infinity Dark Reign one-shot. Here we see Green Goblin dealing with a lot of family drama and trauma from his past. He steals the Infinity Gauntlet and not only uses it to defeat, well, all the heroes of planet Earth and beyond, but it's also revealed that his true motivation for doing all of this and pretty much everything that he's done is to win his father's approval. His father, who was always so unimpressed and who for a long time mistreated him, pushing Norman towards greatness or else. When Norman showcases his villainous accomplishments, it only causes his father to revile him even more though. Norman then decides to use his Infinity Gauntlet to snap and influence his father, making him proud of him instead. But this makes his father's love and approval feel pretty empty, especially when Norman learns that his altered dad actually really only loves him just because he's his son, and not for all that he has accomplished. Which you would think would be really nice, but to Norman he's like, that's infuriating, I hate that. Norman erases his father from existence, and in so doing, erases himself. Don't you hate when that happens? Number 5. Marvel Zombies Resurrection. While not an exact what if series, Marvel Zombies Resurrection definitely feels like a what if version of the Marvel Zombies world that imagines a completely new scenario involving zombies based on established Marvel lore, where Galactus becomes infected with a mysterious new virus that it turns out was created by the Brood, dun dun dun, to infect people more efficiently, turning them instead into zombies. The whole series from 2020 and the intro to it from 2019 that kind of explains all of the lore that you need to know to jump in is all pretty bleak, with only a few people on Earth making it out alive in the end, and still fighting basically just to survive after the world has pretty much been completely infected after Galactus' corpse is hurled to the Earth to be used as a kind of zombie creating bomb. But while the story is pretty dark in terms of all the great heroes that we lose, do not worry, at least Carol's Flurkin cat Chewie stays safe. Thank goodness. In case like me you read this and you were worried the whole time about that little fur baby, I was like, no, please don't let Chewie die, Chewie's so cute. Chewie is also a badass, so really there's no need to worry. Chewie's like one of the best fighters in this entire series, which I love. Number 4. What if Clint Barton killed Norman Osborn during Dark Reign? This what if comes answered in the What If Dark Reign one-shot. Here we get to see what could have happened had Clint Barton's plan to kill Norman Osborn actually come together. Clint himself ends up making a martyr out of Osborn though, unfortunately, and becomes a wanted man in the process. One civilian decides to take the matter of justice into his own hands, calling out the assassin. Clint Francis Barton, and if he doesn't show himself, he threatens to blow up the entire Sunday Inn and all the innocent people that are inside it. Hawkeye does show up though and attempts to talk the man down, but surprisingly, the man pulls a gun and shoots Clint point blank to death rather than surrender. He is taken away, and in the end, Hammer remains in control under Deputy Director, likely now full director actually, Victoria Hand. Basically, if Hawkeye had actually killed Norman Osborn, it would be bad, I think, in the long run. I think that's what we learned. Number 3. What If the Kingdom of Cain? In What If issue 94 out of the 1989 series, also known as Volume 2, we get to visit a world destroyed by the Sentinels. Oh goody. The Sentinels did not only take out all of mutant kind supposedly, but also killed all of Earth's mightiest heroes besides, and its general population of non-powered individuals who were killed by high levels of radiation that the Sentinels emitted. The only one to survive all this destruction is Juggernaut, who wanders the Earth for years reminiscing on his past and all of his wrongdoings, and feeling unbearably lonely all the while. Poor Juggernaut. Magneto shows up and confirms that everything that has come to pass is Juggernaut's fault because he killed Professor X, which was basically the catalyst event for this chain reaction of destruction that has now come to pass. Juggernaut finds and kind of falls into a secret bunker as a result of his fight with Magneto, where he learns that some mutants survived and are actually hiding out. Yay! When they ask him to leave them be though, he refuses, only to learn that this was an attempt to protect themselves against the radiation, which he is now let in by breaking into the bunker, infecting them and ultimately sentencing them to death. So, it's really sad. Juggernaut's like, I'm lonely, I just want to talk to you. And they're just like, you just killed us, so thanks for that. He's like, wow. I ruin everything, this is terrible. Number 2. What If the Traitor? In this alternate tale that comes to us from the 1989 volume of What If issue -1, we get to see what would happen if Trevor Fitzroy went back in time to try and convince Professor X to never create the X-Men. Although Bishop travels back in time to try and stop Fitzroy, it doesn't end up working out. Fitzroy shows the Professor of the future to come and all the war and prosecution that mutants will suffer. When Professor X meets Bishop, he inquires of Jean's fate and learns that she perishes, but that he and his X-Men remain a symbol of hope for the people. Unable to accept the dark future that awaits, however, Professor X seemingly agrees, despite Bishop's pleas, to never let the X-Men form, and Bishop ends up being locked up in prison in the past, with both Fitzroy and Bishop believing the other is the traitor. But who's really the traitor? Number 1. What If Spider-Man Back in Black? This story reimagines what would have happened had MJ ended up being shot by the Kingpin's hitman instead of Aunt May. Mary Jane as such does not end up in intensive care hanging to life by a thread, but instead dies pretty much instantly. This makes Peter lose control, going into a dark rage unlike any we've ever seen. He doesn't just plan on scaring and potentially finishing the Kingpin if MJ dies, because I mean she's already dead, but instead he plans on just straight up setting out to kill whoever was responsible for the hit, which he of course does find out was still Kingpin in this reality. Donning his black costume, he heads out planning to put an end to Kingpin once and for all, despite Aunt May and Iron Man trying to stop him and calm him down. In the end, Peter succeeds in killing Kingpin, Aunt May basically disowns him, and Iron Man has him arrested for murder, citing the Superhero Registration Act. Peter blames Iron Man for all this mess, by the way, demanding a trial with a jury, and Iron Man denies any wrongdoing, claiming Peter made his choice.
Off the list with number 10, What If the Juggernaut? Okay, to start this sad list, we got What If starring the Juggernaut. It was released in 1997, written by George Gonzalez, and we kick off in a world where Sentinels have already wiped out all superheroes. Great start. Plus there's this toxic gas that's filling up the atmosphere which will kill all of life. So things are beginning grim right off the bat, okay. And all that's left now at this point is just the Juggernaut. Now he's hunting down these Sentinels. He wants to die, but his own invulnerability won't let that happen. Kind of like Hulk the End, just a sad strong man in a world full of rubble. So he sees Iron Man's helmet, he sees Cyclops' cracked visor. He's just walking down horrible memory lane. Then he meets a couple of surviving mutants and they're not in good condition, mentally, I mean. They're actually blaming Juggernaut for killing the X-Men, and it all ends with Juggernaut knowing he's going to be the last living being on the planet and that it's his own damn fault. And before we go on to number 9 for our next sad what if story, if you guys could go ahead and please like this video, or else we'll be on a what if you didn't like the video, and then it's going to be a sad video on all the alternate futures where you didn't like our videos. So please go ahead and do that, because that would be great. You guys are the best. Thank you so much. Now back to the list. Number 9. What if Cable had destroyed the X-Men? Well, this one just sounds bad right off the hop. So after Professor X came back to Earth, the team was never going to be the same again. At this X-Men meeting, Xavier gets in a fight with Cable, and then all of a sudden it turns into Cable and his crew versus everybody, and it was just this big brawl. Now they escape, but later on, Cable kills Xavier, Jean, and Scott with a siren bomb. So now everybody's deciding on what to do with this guy. Wolverine's team wanted to kill him, and Storm's team wanted to bring him in. Both are pretty bad. So the Avengers have to step in and fight their battles while they're all working their own stuff out over there. So the Avengers are like, just do your thing, we're gonna go fight your bad guys, just wrap it up. But eventually Cable and his team is killed by Wolverine's team. Number 8, what if Wolverine battled Conan the Barbarian? Written by Glenn Herdling and released in 1990, what if Wolverine had battled Conan the Barbarian? So basically Conan and Wolverine switched dimensions. So we have Wolverine causing trouble in the Hyborian Age alongside Red Sonja, and Conan smashes Cyclops in the head with a rock, which causes the full fury of the Phoenix Force to be unleashed. So now this has caused a ripple effect, so the psychic rapport was shattered, and without Wolverine to hurl Colossus at her, there's nothing that prevents Jean Grey from transforming into her dark persona before she can destroy herself, resulting in the destruction of the entire universe. So just like that, Cyclops gets hit with a rock and then it all goes to shit. So yeah, crossovers are for sure fun, but you gotta look at the possible ways it could go poorly as well. Wolverine versus Conan the Barbarian is definitely one of those ways. Number 7, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? In this reality, Professor X is the one who becomes Juggernaut and gets buried. Now this causes him to go down a completely different path when it comes down to the X-Men, because after this, he never ended up creating the X-Men because he was stuck. So now the Fantastic Four wants to defeat Magneto instead. So Professor X, he's still listening. He's using his mind powers. He's knowing what's going on out there. He's kind of getting pissed that he's not able to go out and help. So he digs his way out, and his telepathy powers are now stronger than ever with his new Juggernaut super strength. So he takes over the country with his own X-Men posse to enforce these anti-human laws. So Cyclops even sided with Magneto at this point because he could block Xavier's telepathy. So they're battling it out on Asteroid M, and Cyclops is trying to remind Xavier about his original dream, you know, with humans and mutants living together in harmony. And before he could really consider it, the ground beneath him exploded and he got launched into space, probably forever, and man, that's gotta be boring. Imagine not dying in space. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. This should be number 1 maybe, I don't know. Number 6, what if the Hulk died and Kyra lived? Written by Greg Pak, released in 2007. Okay, so we start with the Hulk saving Kyra by throwing her out of the way of the explosion instead of the ship. So now the Hulk had died along with Crown City. And Kyra, she's pretty pissed, right? She takes all the old power from the planet and gets ready with her sights set on Earth. She's coming. First stop, of course, being the moon, where she defeats Black Bolt and then implants a obedience disc on him. So when Strange and Sentry come to the rescue, she makes Black Bolt use his sonic scream, which of course results in both of them dying. She's killing everybody fast, okay? So Heroine comes to stop her and says that basically if you kill everybody on Earth, nobody can honor your dead husband. So she says, fine, but you're gonna wish you were dead instead. And then it cuts to 21 years later, and she's made all the remaining heroes build this massive Hulk statue. And when it's finally done, she walks onto the hand of the statue and then turns into stone, joining him. The end. Yeah, how sad is that? I mean, I feel like it wouldn't take those guys 21 years to build a statue. I mean, if they're getting paid by the hour, sure, then by all means, go for it. Number 5, what if the Avengers had never been? Written by Jim Shooter and Gil Kane, released in 1977. This was actually the first what if issue with a major death. So of course it has to be on the list somewhere. So we start off with the Hulk. Now this time he's not hitting, he's actually quitting. Now this caused the Avengers to dismantle. So Stark asked Rick Jones to find the Hulk, Thor went back to Asgard, and Jan and Hank went back to living as normal people. So Rick finds him, but he's now being held hostage from the Green Giant. So Stark swoops in and saves him, and they head back to the Avengers mansion. So Namor and the Hulk call out the Avengers, or rather what's left of them. So Iron Man makes a few iron suits for the others, and the suits, I mean, they aren't Tony Stark. They can't control these things nearly as well as he can. Unless you're in the movie Iron Man 3, then everyone can do that all of a sudden. So they stay in retirement. They're like, screw that, I don't want any part of that. So he's like, whatever. He powers up his own suit a little bit too much, and then he heads to the battle alone. He fights a bit, and then right when he's about to be ended, the rest show up. Jan, Hank, and Rick are back. Nice. So Tony is done at this point. His armor is weak, he's close to being finished off, so he uses his remaining power to regenerate Hank's armor. So the Hulk snaps out of it and goes after Namor, while the rest of our heroes mourn over a fallen Tony Stark, who sacrificed himself to save his team. Similar vibes to Endgame. A lot of feels in that one, okay? A lot of feels. A good number 5 feels train. Number 4, what if somebody else besides Spider-Man had been bitten by the radioactive spider? Written by Don Glut, released in 1977, we get to see a dream play out. Look, we've all probably wanted to be Spider-Man at one point or another. Of course, I mean, doing backflips and swinging downtown, that's gotta be the vibe. But of course, when it comes to stopping criminals and taking out supervillains, it's probably pretty stressful. So in this what if, we get to see this idea play out. We see other characters have a crack at the life of the web slinger, starting with Flash Thompson. And let's just say it's a lot harder than it looks. So we got Flash Thompson. Now after he gets bit, he teaches a bad driver a lesson, and he feels pretty good with his new given abilities, and he plays it out a bit. So he decides to take a crack at professional wrestling, maybe make some cash, which is a pretty good idea. I mean, you're a superhero, so you can definitely win most, if not all, fights. But he accidentally kills the guy. Sorry, oops. Then Betty Brant is now up with the powers. Okay, so let's see how she would do in the life. Well, her costume for starters is pretty badass. But when she runs out of web fluid while making TikToks, a thief runs by and gets away. And that thief, of course, being the one to take Uncle Ben's life. So far, so bad. Now finally, we have our third contender with the powers. John Jameson. While his outfit was also pretty good, he couldn't do the job like Peter, and he actually died while trying to prevent a space shuttle from crashing. I guess it's not as easy as it looks. I mean, to be fair, if something actually happened and it had webs, I really wouldn't know what to do. I would do a backflip and be like, is it fixed? No? It was cool though. Number 3. What if the Punisher killed Daredevil? We all know the Punisher as the guy who usually brutally kills criminals. See, with superheroes, those guys he likes to hit with a tranquilizer. But in this what if, we see Daredevil get hit with one of those tranq darts and fall off a building. So while Kingpin prepared for his next step now that he's out of the way, Spider-Man stepped in to deliver some justice on Frank Castle. So he finds the Punisher, and Punisher has no tranq darts left. So he shoots Spider-Man in the shoulder. It's messy, but not fatal, he says. He should survive unless he exerts himself, which he does. And his identity is then revealed. Then it cuts to Aunt May's house, and she grabs a paper, reads the shocking headline, and then the house explodes from a missile launched from the Silver Mane City. Boom, house gone. And then after a little while, Peter shows up in a hospital gown, ready to get some revenge on Frank. Peter does pretty well in the fight, so well he's actually just moments away from throwing the Punisher off of a building to his death. But the Punisher stalls and says he has info about his Aunt May, and this slows Peter down for just a split second, allowing for the Punisher to unload on Peter. God, imagine if they introduced Frank Castle in the MCU and then they immediately did something like this. Number 2, what if Kraven the Hunter had killed Spider-Man? Released in 1990, written by Richard Howell. Yeah, judging by this title alone, this one's a little sad. I figured we're already on the Spider-Man misfortune train, so I had to throw this one in next, you know? What if Kraven had killed Spider-Man? Okay, so we start with Pete patrolling the streets when he's suddenly trapped by Kraven in a net, and just like that, he unloads, killing Peter Parker. And of course, he eats a bunch of spiders and suits up himself to celebrate. Yeah, you eat a bunch of spiders, now you're Spider-Man. That's how it works. I think a human eats like, what, 7 spiders in a year when they're sleeping? So we have like, what, 7,000 to go? So now he's Spider-Man, just like that, cool. Meanwhile, MJ is like, where on earth is that Peter Parker guy? And then MJ is approached by a couple of thugs, and then in comes Spider-Man to save her. Only it's Kraven, but she doesn't know that. But she can tell something's up because Spider-Man doesn't recognize her, and he's way more brutal with taking out these thugs. So Cap, Daredevil, and Human Torch jump in to see what's up with the wall crawler. They did a decent job of wearing down the beast, but he needed more power. He ate a bunch of spiders earlier, so now it's only fair if he tries to eat Spider-Man's dead body, right? Comics are weird. So MJ tells Cap and the gang that Spider-Man is actually Peter Parker, and that the Spider-Man is indeed not the same. And then Aunt May goes into denial hearing about the news. She's messed up now for life. And the media isn't happy with the tension between supers and the public. The story ends with MJ standing at Peter's funeral, wondering how things could have been. God, Peter just can't catch a break, eh? Oh my God. And finally, number 1, the saddest of them all, what if Wolverine father? Written by Rob Williams, released in 2011, we start off with Wolverine taking out the Winter Soldier. And we see a world with Wolverine and Daken if they had spent their life growing together as father and son. So now we get to see what it would have been like if Logan was there for them the whole time. Now in this reality, they're named John. This life, however, was filled with repression and lies and led to John leaving his home and rising up as Daken. becoming the leader of the Japanese underworld. So Wolverine tried to save him, but because of the way he was raised with this version of Logan, he looked at him like a monster. He viewed himself as a monster too. "This is the Muramasa blade, John," says Logan as he stabs him. "Healing factors don't work on it." The issue ends with the boy dying beside his father, and Logan uses the same blade on himself. And that's the end. That's the end of the comic. Everyone dies, everyone's sad. That's what ifs for you, right there.
And at number 10, what if Professor X had become the Juggernaut? From What If issue 13 volume 2, here we have a story in which Charles Xavier becomes the Juggernaut. It's a simple answer to what would happen. Xavier ends up getting buried alive. But the consequences are much greater. Because of this, he's never able to create the X-Men, leaving the Fantastic Four responsible for taking on Magneto. It gets worse, snowballing into some major anti-mutant hysteria. Eventually Xavier manages to dig himself out of the ground, but it's too late for him to try to change the world for the better. He ends up using his super strength combined with his powerful psychic abilities to take over the US and enforce anti-human laws, using the X-Men to do so. In the process, he ends up defeating a lot of major Marvel characters, including the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Doctor Doom, Iron Man, Daredevil, and even the Hulk. Russia then tries to bomb the US, which is the catalyst for World War III. Xavier steps up, finding a way to make the Earth livable despite all the damage from the bomb, and ends up becoming the supreme leader of the planet. His only ask? That mutants aren't treated like crap. More mutants are born thanks to the bomb radiation, making up almost half of the planet's population. But despite the world finding some sort of peace, Xavier has gone mad, and in secret the remaining heroes and superpowered characters plot his demise, no longer believing in his dream since mutants now openly terrorize humans. This leads to a clash between Xavier and several of the X-Men on Asteroid M, with Quicksilver using explosives to launch Xavier into space, a potentially temporary solution that leaves Cyclops, Jean Grey, Scarlet Witch, and Quicksilver with the responsibility of trying to repair the world in the meantime. Talk about a hefty storyline. And at number 9, what if Wolverine had lived during the age of Conan the Barbarian? Conan the Barbarian has made many an appearance in What If comics over the years. In this story though, which appears in What If Volume 2 issue 16, Wolverine is transported to another time. Within the first few panels, he slays a T-Rex, impressing the locals. He finds himself completely immersing himself in the culture, getting a new outfit, and not understanding a damn word that anyone is saying. Eventually he crosses paths with Conan, a battle ensues, and Conan slits Wolverine's throat. Thinking he's killed him, he walks away, but little does he know that Wolverine has a mutant healing factor. He pursues him, more shenanigans ensue, and Wolverine ends up staying in Conan's world, with Conan being teleported back out to where the X-Men are battling on the moon. And he also ends up with Sonya, who looks just like Jean Grey apparently. Oh, redheads. And at number 8, What If? X-Men Wedding Album. Issue 60 from Volume 2 of the What If series explored a specific theme. It contains a slew of stories related to Cyclops and Jean Grey's relationship, exploring different facets and possibilities. There's What If Scott Summers and Jean Grey had married earlier, which sees the couple marrying earlier on during the beginnings of the mutant team. Another one is What If Scott Summers and Jean Grey had never fallen in love at all, which results in Cyclops leaving the X-Men team altogether. Then there's What If Phoenix had fallen for Wolverine, perhaps the most tragic tale of them all, which involves the X-Men disbanding, ultimately thanks to the fact that all of the characters die. The framing for the entire issue revolves around the mainstream Earth 616 continuity of Jean and Scott, particularly pertaining to X-Men Volume 2 issue 30, in which the two have their wedding. And at 7, What If Cable had destroyed the X-Men? This one comes from What If Volume 2 issue 46, which was released in 1993. Its narrative follows Charles Xavier returning to Earth after being on a hiatus, only to discover that his X-Men teams have all strayed significantly. He holds meetings with each of the teams only to get into a fight with Cable, in which a battle ensues. Some side with Xavier while others side with Cable, and Cable ends up fleeing. Later on, he assassinates Xavier along with Jean Grey and Scott Summers, killing them when they least expect it by launching a siren bomb at their dinner table. This causes a major disturbance between the members of all the X teams, dividing them, causing them to fight amongst themselves. In the meantime, the teams outside of the mutant-based ones are forced to pick up the slack. The Avengers and Fantastic Four are fighting off typical X-Men villains since the X-Men are too busy beating each other up instead. There's a massive fight and Wolverine's team of mutants clashes with Cable's team, killing Cable and his pals. Everything kind of falls apart there, with Magneto swooping in to try to get the remaining members of these battle-worn teams to join up with him. And talk about being an opportunist. Can you blame him though? And at 6, What If Wolverine was an agent of S.H.I.E.L.D.? This one might be my personal favorite. From What If Volume 2 issue 7, first released in 1989, here we have Wolverine, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. The timeline diverges from the 616 timeline after Wolverine encounters the Wendigo with the Hulk. After that battle, he goes on loan to S.H.I.E.L.D. for a single mission to help them retrieve a stolen LMD tech. Hydra, of course, is the culprit behind the theft. Nick Fury and Wolverine hunt down the LMD robots and destroy them, one of which includes a decoy of Dum Dum Dugan. Upset about this revelation, Fury sends Wolverine and Black Widow to hunt down any other LMDs possibly infiltrating S.H.I.E.L.D. Turns out half of the crew on board of their ship were robots. The trio then set out to hit Hydra's base and rescue the real Dum Dum, which has them crossing paths with Madame Hydra and Baron von Strucker, who is in possession of the Satan Claw. A brawl ensues, with S.H.I.E.L.D. being victorious. Fury then offers Wolverine a spot permanently on the team, and Logan, wanting a change of pace, agrees. It's around this time on 616 that he'd be joining up with the X-Men anyway. Logan rises in the ranks, becoming Fury's number 2, and later on, Fury is murdered by a Strucker LMD seeking revenge, who takes him out in his flying Ferrari nonetheless. Gotta love the 80s. At Fury's funeral, Dum Dum retires, which makes Logan the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. This has a powerful domino effect on the world. Using S.H.I.E.L.D., Wolverine prevents several major events in the Marvel Universe, including the creation of Sentinels, Dark Phoenix's emergence, there's no Mutant Registration Act, and overall, it improves human and mutant relations for the better. Kind of hurts to see the potential Logan had at S.H.I.E.L.D., doesn't it? But on a different note, fun fact, another story in this issue is what if Aunt May was a mutant with claws? So I guess, that's one hell of a reminder that this is a what if issue. In at number 5, what if the X-Men had stayed in Asgard? Based on the comic New Mutants Special Edition issue 1, What If the X-Men Had Stayed in Asgard is a riff off of a story in which concluded with them leaving Asgard to return to Earth. The premise is very self-explanatory here. The X-Men all vote, and those who wish to leave are sent home by Loki. The rest of the story follows the lives of these remaining X-Men and how they assimilate into Asgardian culture. Rogue finds love, being able to touch the Asgardian people. Mirage becomes a Valkyrie. Storm becomes the goddess of thunder, and Loki attempts to trick her into slaying his brother, who has been transformed into a frog. Hela then attacks Asgard, and the X-Men alongside Thor, who is eventually transformed back to his normal self, fight her and her army. They defeat her, and Thor returns to Earth, giving Storm the throne and Asgard to rule. And Loki? Well, for the tricks that he played in getting the X-Men to stay, he slowly goes mad by the end of the comic, thanks to the ones who sit above in shadow. Moving on to number 4, what if the new X-Men had died on their very first mission? Coming out of What If Volume 2 Issue 9, this comic book has a wonderful cover. It's Charles Xavier being pushed away from the X-Men's funeral by Beast, shouting out up into the heavens, "The X-Men are dead and I killed them!" The concept for this one places the original X-Men and the new X-Men being killed off on their mission, with Xavier telepathically feeling each and every one of their deaths. Beast, the only X-Men member to not have gone on this mission, tries to console the depressed Xavier. Count Nefaria sees how weakened the X-Men are and attacks, which forces Beast into forming a new ragtag team that consists of himself, Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, Siren, Warpath, and Namorita, the female version of Namor. This new team end up fighting and defeating Count Nefaria, and Xavier, seeing this new team all put together, begins to come out of his depression, asking the new team to stay on and become official X-Men. All works out for the best. Except, all of the original ones are dead, but hey. Moving on to number 3, what if Wolverine had killed the Hulk? From What If Volume 1 Issue 13, we see a rehashing of Wolverine's first appearance in the comics, when he first crossed paths with the Hulk in the Incredible Hulk issue 181. Although he technically made a cameo in the issue prior, but cameo. It was like in a panel. Now in that story, Wolverine and the Hulk initially see each other as a threat before teaming up together to take down the Wendigo. But in this story though, Wolverine and the Hulk duke it out. And rather than being interrupted by the Wendigo, which initially causes them to stop fighting each other, the Wendigo never shows up. This ends up resulting in Wolverine fatally wounding the Hulk, and leads to him fleeing from authorities despite his attacks being out of self-defense. Because he's on the run, he doesn't join the X-Men. Instead, he teams up with Magneto and joins the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, with his first assignment being to infiltrate the X-Men. He does, but in the process grows close to the mutant team, and when the time comes for him to double-cross them, he just can't do it. Instead, he turns on Magneto, and Magneto and Wolverine fight, with them killing each other in the process. And at number 2, what if Wolverine was Lord of the Vampires? This one's great. Here's a what if story that should be familiar to some of you who frequent our channel. From What If Volume 2 Issue 24, What If Wolverine was Lord of the Vampires? Tells the tale of Wolverine and the X-Men crossing paths with none other than Count Dracula. The two fight, and Wolverine gets bitten, becoming a vampire himself. But thanks to his willpower, he's able to evade Dracula's mind control abilities, and ends up fighting him for dominance. Wolverine succeeds and kills him, and then proceeds to transform all of the other X-Men into vampires, with him and his new army going around biting beloved heroes and draining them of their blood. Eventually, for some reason that I swear totally makes sense, Doctor Strange has taken over the body of the Punisher and goes after Wolverine, and manages to get through to Logan in the end, stopping his blood reign of terror. And finally, in at number 1, what if Phoenix had not died? From What If Issue 27 Volume 1, we see the Watcher looking into an alternate reality in which Jean Grey did not die during the incursion with the Shi'ar. Rather, she was reborn. And when the X-Men find themselves facing off against Galactus and Terrax in the Shi'ar galaxy, the Phoenix rises and and kicks some serious butt, stopping Galactus. But something is not right. Jean Grey is overwhelmed by the Phoenix Force and ends up losing control, destroying a star. Once back home on Earth at the X-Mansion, Kitty Pryde confronts Jean about the star that she destroyed. This does not bode well. Jean loses it and becomes Dark Phoenix, killing Kitty in response. The X-Men attempt to stop her, but her rampage continues. She ends up killing Polaris. Cyclops tries to intervene too, but Phoenix murders him as well. And it only gets worse from there. Jean entirely loses control and the Phoenix Force engulfs the entire world, destroying it, with it continuing to expand in the universe, consuming it all bit by bit. Talk about depressing. Number 10. What if Jane Foster had found the Hammer of Thor? This one isn't so strange for the premise, but it's more bizarre because of where the premise took us in the end. This is a story we've also seen adapted to the main continuity, though fortunately it does not quite share this same ending, which I'm pretty happy about, to be honest. Jane ends up finding the Hammer of Thor and becoming the goddess of storms, taking up the mantle Thordis. Lady Sif, missing Thor, ends up finding and falling in love with Donald Blake, who is later revealed, of course, to be the true Thor when Odin asks Thordis to return his hammer to him. As thanks for her service, however, Odin makes Jane a goddess. However, as Jane was in love with Donald, who is now Thor and is in love with Lady Sif, her heart is broken, and she has to be returned to her mortal self because of this. But Odin has a better solution and proposes to Jane, who agrees, to marry him, and then they all live happily ever after. With Jane finding that those very qualities she both admired and loved in the mortal Don Blake are also to be found in the father of immortal Thor. My goodness. That's a very strange ending to that story. How about instead of being with my son, you be with me, his father, haha. Okay, Odin, what? I feel like I like it better when Odin just doesn't really like Jane. I think that works more. Is that weird? Number 9. What if the Avengers were the last superheroes on Earth? This story allows us to imagine what the world would be like if all the superpowered beings on Earth were defeated by the Avengers. At the behest of the Scarlet Centurion, the Avengers attempt to eradicate all superpowered beings, including themselves. In the end, after all threats have been defeated, they decide to disband, being the last ones with powers, in order to usher in an era of peace on Earth. They all go off to live their own normal-ish lives. Thor returns to Asgard, Tony returns to being a billionaire playboy in Las Vegas, only to realize that it doesn't really bring him any joy and actually considers entering into politics. And Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym actually seem to find quite a bit of happiness, going off and getting married and focusing on their time with one another, which is kind of sweet. I guess if they weren't superheroes it would work out pretty well for them. Scarlet Centurion does return to threaten Earth and forces the Avengers to come together one more time, but after defeating him, they once again go their separate ways back into retirement. And they also kind of question, like, if being a superhero is actually a bad thing, because does it create more problems than it solves? Just a quick reminder, if you love these what if lists, I personally love bringing them to you because these stories are amazing. Be sure to show us that love by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing, commenting, subscribing, all the things. Number 8. What if the Gamma Bomb spawned 1,000 Hulks? This story comes to us from volume 2 of the What If series that started back in 1989. In issue 71, we get to imagine a reality where instead of just one Hulk, or you know, the members of the Hulk family plus Hulk, we had 1,000 of them, which I would say is ultimately too many Hulks. In this story, it was the bombing on Hiroshima that resulted in these thousands of Hulks coming into existence, survivors of the attack that were basically mutated, so they became Hulks. In the end, Bruce Banner, aka Hulk, who of course goes on to become the Hulk in the story, must attempt to stand up against this army and attempt to defeat it with the help of some friends. Number 7. What if Betty Brant, instead of Spider-Man, had been bitten by the radioactive spider? This one comes to us from a 3-part story and is simply one story within that. It is from the original What If series volume 1 from 1997, issue number 7. Here, Betty Brant, instead of Peter Parker, is the one bitten by the radioactive spider, gaining spider-like abilities. While the story isn't a strange premise at all, like I don't think it's weird for Betty Brant to become, you know, a version of Spider-Man, what really makes this one stand out for me in terms of its weirdness is Betty's costume here, which is It's something. It's also odd that in this alternate reality, Betty happens to be the only alternate person to become Spider-Man that manages to survive the ordeal, with both John Jameson and Flash Thompson in this issue, who are featured in the other two stories, dying as a result of gaining spider powers and attempting to use them. Instead of Betty choosing not to pursue the thief that kills Peter's Uncle Ben, she simply is unable to because she used up all her web fluid posing for pictures for Peter. Which is a whole other thing, but also, wait, can't you just go after them anyways? Don't you have superpowers? It doesn't matter that your web fluid is gone. Anyways, she still blames herself for Uncle Ben's death and decides to quit being Spider Lady, which I think is a little harsh. I feel like she wasn't really super responsible for that, but I guess she could have gone after him. I don't know why she didn't do that. Be like, use your super strength, climb on walls, do any of the other things you can do. Number 6. What if Submariner never regained his memories? This story allows us to glimpse into an alternate reality where Namor never met the Human Torch and never ended up regaining his memories and returning to Atlantis, learning that he was the true ruler of the underwater kingdom. Instead, the Submariner remains unaware of his true heritage and ends up joining a ship's crew, finding himself inexplicably drawn to the sea. I wonder why. The captain of the ship, Namor's friend McCandless, ends up being mutineered against and goes overboard while injured when he believes they found the lost entrance to the center of the earth. Namor, or Mr. Smith as he's known, follows after him and ends up being retrieved from the ice-cold water by Inuits later on. They end up worshipping Namor as the Lord of the Frozen Sea, along with frozen Captain America, who they worship as the Lord of the Frozen Ice. And Namor's like, I guess this is my life now, and I'm pretty good with it. So I guess it all worked out in the end, and now he just gets to be the Lord of the Sea really far up north where it's cold. Cool, I guess? Number 5. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? While all of these stories are based on things that actually did happen, this is also based on something that did happen, so if you think it sounds weird because it's just so random, that is a thing that actually happened, where Iron Man and Doctor Doom in main continuity traveled back to the time of Arthurian legend. However, rather than getting back home in this version while Doom manages to leave, he leaves Iron Man trapped in the past. Oh no! A weird turn of events ends up leaving Tony Stark as the ruler and king of England following the death of his friend King Arthur. Tony actually proves to be a great king and lives out his days there in the past just as an accomplished and celebrated ruler. I actually wonder what effect that would have had on the present, because I feel like everything would be very different if Tony Stark were the king of England. This all goes down in issue 33 of the 1997 What If series, so you can check that out if you want. Number 4. What if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? One of them is just being a giant brain. It's true. Actually, overall, these powers feel very Doom Patrol meets X-Men in my opinion. In this alternate story, when subjected to cosmic radiation, the FF get completely different powers than what each member has in main continuity. Johnny becomes a robot, Ben gets dragon-like wings, Reed is just a disembodied brain, admittedly not a very great power, and Sue ends up with the least original powers, getting Reed's old powers instead, the ability to stretch her body like Taffy or Silly Putty. Really, I feel like Sue always gets sort of like the worst part of these stories whenever she's in a What If. Hers are always so like quick or just so kinda lame, and I'm like, dang, why doesn't Invisible Woman get some cool stuff? I think she was still Invisible Girl at this time though, maybe that's why. Number 3. What if Aunt May instead of her nephew Peter had been bitten by that radioactive spider? This story reimagines what would have happened if once again it was not Peter Parker who received the fateful radioactive spider bite, but instead was his elderly Aunt May. This is from a humor issue, so you know it's gonna be weird and you know it's gonna be great. And it is. Aunt May here ends up getting bit after realizing that Peter had left his lunch at home on the day he and his class were meant to visit the exhibit at the Science Institute. And if you're like, Amanda, it's not called the Science Institute. Seriously, if you go to this issue, that is what is written on the building in the Science Institute. Of what? We don't know. She successfully delivers the forgotten lunch to Peter, cottage cheese and mashed string beans, but ends up feeling unwell on her way home, and finds that she has developed superpowers. She makes her own costume, becoming Spider-Man, and ends up facing off in this story with the ridiculous villain, Leapfrog. Because that's just how it goes. Number 2. What if the Fantastic Four all had the stretching powers of Mr. Fantastic? Oh boy, I love this issue because we get 4 stories where we get to imagine what it would be like if multiple members of the FF shared basically the same powers. And in the one where they all get stretching powers, they just never end up becoming the Fantastic Four because their collective power is just considered, well, kinda lame. Sue in fact insists that they never let anyone know of their powers because she feels like, and I quote, a freak. Both Sue and Ben feel as though the stretching powers are ridiculous, monstrous, ugly, and dumb, while Reed and Johnny actually think they're pretty neat and even could be useful. Still, Sue and Ben's way of thinking wins out, so the Fantastic Four never become a superhero team. The end. Number 1. What if Thanos had changed Galactus into a human being? I really love this What If story personally. It comes to us from, once again, one of the humor issues of What If, so you know it's gonna be a riot. In this story, Thanos turns Galactus into a human being in order to defeat him, and Galactus ends up on Earth with no memory of who he was or is. He does, however, happen to look a lot like Elvis Presley, and even sings and plays like him too. He meets a woman named Gertrude who introduces him to the works of Presley, and Galactus is basically convinced that he must indeed be like an amnesiac version of Elvis Presley, returned from the dead. He goes on to have a successful music career, and when his memories are later restored by Adam Warlock, who also offers to return his power to him, he actually decides instead to stay on Earth and live out his life here as Elvis with Gertrude and her son Toby, which, I mean, fair enough. That sounds like a pretty good life. Number 10. What if Aunt May was a mutant with claws? I just love how this is posed as a scenario where Aunt May just uses her claws in place of the good old-fashioned parental guilt trip. Aunt May is having dinner with her nephew Peter and his girlfriend Mary Jane. She cooked for them and they immensely enjoyed their meal, but when she offers them a pie for dessert, they both insist they're just too full and they cannot eat another bite. They offer that after their date, they're going to see a show, they might have a slice upon their return. But this isn't good enough for Aunt May. Fortunately, in this story she has Wolverine claws, which she snicks out and uses to intimidate the youngsters into postponing their date so they can stay for dessert. She uses her claws, of course, to also slice the pie, because Aunt May. What else is she gonna use them for? Although I would really love an alternate world where Aunt May just was Wolverine. Or I was posing earlier an idea of an alternate world where everyone is Aunt May. What about that world? Number 9. What if Iron Man demon in an armor? Remember that time Tony Stark and Victor Von Doom swapped bodies? Oh yeah, that's the thing that happened in this What If special out of 2010. Here both brilliant minds were roommates in college and Victor used a machine on Stark to swap minds with him. Stark's memories were also wiped, so he never knew he had been Tony Stark. Victor, as Tony, used his millions to create his own inventions, but ultimately ended up ruining the Stark name with less than noble pursuits and his own greed. On the other hand, Stark as Victor succumbed to alcoholism but recovered and then created Doom Industries, a brilliant company responsible for its own Doom armor suits and technological advancements. In the end, Doom in Stark's body attempted to attack Doom Industries but was apprehended by Stark in Doom's body. He then revealed the swap that had taken place years earlier and bargained to swap back in exchange for his freedom, but Stark in Doom's body is just like, nah thanks, I kinda have the better company and life now in your body. I like this body. Why would I want to be Tony now when I can just be the honorable Dr. Doom? Good point. Good point. Why would you ever want to be Tony Stark when you could be Dr. Doom? That's the real question. That'd be awesome. Number 8. What if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? This story offers a glimpse into an alternate reality where World War II was fought in space? This story takes place in an alternate reality where instead of being divided by eastern and western fronts, the battle is divided between beta and alpha sectors. As such, we get to see Sergeant Nick Fury fighting alongside the Howling Commandos in outer space, smoking a cigar even while wearing a space helmet. Seems like a bad idea, but it's Nick Fury, so that's what he's gonna do. It's also explained that we have Da Vinci's inventions to thank for this early technological advancement, which led to us getting to outer space in the 1940s, which is maybe the best bit of exposition explanation in the book, and just in general that I've read. It's pretty ridiculous. Oh, and of course we also get to watch our heroes fight aliens, because space. Number 7. What if the world knew Daredevil was blind? Yeah, this is a weird story, especially because it kind of implies that if Daredevil wasn't blind and didn't have superpowers, his life would actually be better or easier. As though, like, you know, if you're blind, your life is gonna be terrible, but if you're not blind, your life is great, which I don't think is true. That's not how that works. I mean, he's also still got an enemy in Wilson Fisk, I'd assume, so I just feel like this is a big oversimplification. In this story, the world finds out that Daredevil is blind, and as a result, those close to him begin to piece together that Daredevil is in fact Matt Murdock. Because, you know, Matt Murdock is blind. Get it? He then ends up having his sight restored via an operation, unmasks, and lives happily ever after with Karen, trading his heroic initials of DD for DA and becoming the new district attorney of New York. He's swapping it out. I also love how Karen's like, oh, thank goodness you're not a superhero, now we can get married. Number 6. What if Black Bolt talked in his sleep? This is a very short story, and I think you can imagine how it ends if you are familiar with the Inhuman King known as Black Bolt, but it's also just very humorously written. You can find this single-page story near the back of issue 9 of What If Volume Number 2. Apparently when Black Bolt eats pineapple pizza before bed, it has disastrous consequences. Also, good to know what kind of pizza Black Bolt likes. I personally also love pineapple on my pizza, but I feel like that just lets you know if someone's cool or not. Oh, the strange things that you learn about people and pizza. If Black Bolt talked in his sleep all the time, the Inhumans would have a lot of rebuilding to do all the time. I also just like how resigned some of these Inhumans are in that last panel. Like, oh, he did it again. I guess I'm just gonna sleep on some rubble for the rest of the night. That's just how it is. Shucks. And only Medusa is the one that's mad. She's like, baby, I told you not to eat that pizza. This always happens. Number 5. What if Wolverine had a styrofoam skeleton? Issue 100 is just one of the best for some real weird stories. One of the stories it offers us is only told through a mock-up cover, but it's so good it's just gotta be mentioned because the cover is just too good. It also is presented beside another great mock-up cover offering an alternate story where Peter Parker became Sheep Boy instead of Spider-Man. Sheep Boy, I love it. In the Wolverine mock-up, we're offered an alternate Logan who goes by the codename Wolverwim. He is cowering on the front cover, about to have his styrofoam skeleton ripped out by Maggie Nito, a mean little girl. I also just love the reference to Wolverine also losing his nose when he lost his adamantium that's on there. Mock-up what if stories are actually the best. I wish we got a full story of this. Someone write that, please. Number 4. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? The craziest thing about this what if is that it's actually kind of an alternate retelling of a real-life main continuity story where Iron Man was transported to Camelot in medieval times with Dr. Doom and managed to escape. Although this story offers the alternative of, you know, what if he wasn't able to escape and only Dr. Doom got out? You can find it in What If Volume 1, Issue 33. The answer to the question is that Iron Man would be drained of energy, get frustrated in realizing that, you know, he couldn't rebuild a time machine, and ends up becoming Sir Anthony of Iron, an Iron Knight at King Arthur's Round Table. In fact, he uses his suit to help protect the realm from the evil Morgana, defeating her, but in the ensuing battle is unable to prevent King Arthur from becoming mortally wounded. With his dying breath, Arthur makes Sir Anthony his successor, even though they kinda just met, but it's fine I guess. Which means that the Anthony of Iron Man's past, his past self from the future, would probably be really weirded out if he ever read any stories of Camelot. He'd be like, Sir Anthony of Iron became the king. Wait. I'm Iron Man. What? Maybe that was actually his inspiration in the alternate reality to create the Iron Man suit. And now Tony's just stuck in like a time loop. Number 3. What if Wolverine was the Lord of Vampires? In this story, Wolverine becomes the new Lord of Vampires, which is kinda weird considering what we know of Wolverine's healing factor now, but this is also obviously an alternate reality and a story that was written in the 90s, so there's that. Here Wolverine is transformed into a vampire by Dracula. It also features a sweet vampire hunter version of Punisher who is sporting Doctor Strange's cape, and I personally think that the Punisher looks amazing in that cape. So lavish. I just want him to wear capes all the time now. In the end, Punisher is defeated, but Wolverine has a crisis of conscience and ends up flipping to the side of good once more, killing himself and all the other vampire supes and villains he'd made at the same time. And for some reason, Doc Ock's body and tentacles turn to dust. Now, shouldn't his tentacles be okay though? Because they're not made of his tissue. Also, I love when people are like, you're dust, and all their clothes become dust. I'm like, shouldn't their clothes be fine? Anyways, it's a small technical thing, but it bothers me. Number 2. What if paper skin? Remember when we were talking about issue 100 of volume 2 of What If? Well, an actual story that is featured in there is called Paper Skin. It is honestly such a strange story. I need to share it with you. This is a what if story that seems to posit the question of what if Mr. Sinister could offer Gambit a cure for Rogue's powers. It's revealed in the story that Gambit has already betrayed the X-Men by bargaining with Sinister, offering important Cerebro files in exchange for what he wants. Although what Gambit wants is not actually for him, but is kind of for all mutant kind, a cure to the legacy virus. As he's about to leave after getting that cure, Sinister offers him something else that he simply can't resist. A cure for Rogue, his one true love, to help her control her powers. He agrees to steal one more thing for Sinister in exchange for the cure, a tithe box. Sinister has been searching for them and collecting them over the years. In the end, Rogue accepts the cure but can't accept that Gambit has been helping Sinister, and so she kills him, taking his powers and also his looks seemingly, which is kind of weird. It's like Gambit with and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this art, but okay. She goes after Sinister only to find the secret of what the boxes contained was Marvel Comics! Gasp. Now Sinister has so much information because he's been reading Marvel Comics. What a weird reality. What a meta reality. Number 1. What if Avengers vs. X-Men? In this bizarro story, Magneto helps to ensure that Hope ends up getting the Phoenix Force instead of it being split up into Iron Man by 5 parts, which possesses and creates the Phoenix 5. Magneto is seemingly helping Hope to control these new and awesome powers, but when she struggles and begins to turn dark, he suggests she give him some power to help her. In reality, Magneto kinda wants all the power for himself, which is just what he takes. This all happens in the last issue, by the way, of this 4-part what if story, and after Magneto takes the power, it gets pretty weird. Yeah, that's not where it ends, it just keeps going forever. He takes the power and is instantly corrupted by it. As such, Xavier somehow uses his powers to temporarily mess with Magneto's sight, despite the fact that Magneto is wearing his helmet, and then Wolverine snicks him through the eyes. This results in Magneto basically exploding, killing everyone on the planet, and destroying the Earth. Then Jean shows up randomly and just kinda reveals she saw all of this coming. She uses her Phoenix powers to fix the planet, bringing back plant and animal life, but not people for some reason. She says it's up to her and Wolverine, as basically an Eve and an Adam of sorts, to do that. She could've just brought all those people back, I'm pretty sure, because she's got the power of the Phoenix, but yeah, it's a weird one. It's a weird one.
Number 10. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? The world needs to know. This was part of a double issue, the same one that brought us the question, what if Dazzler had been the Herald of Galactus? This one takes a turn off of Iron Man number 150. In this tale, Doctor Doom betrays Iron Man and leaves him stranded in the past, back in Camelot, because I mean, where else would you be stranded in a fictional Arthurian story? Despite his genius level intellect, there just isn't enough around for Iron Man to make a time machine, so he's stuck there, trapped in the past, as Marvel's favorite thing. Say it with me now, a man out of time. So Tony stays there and becomes a Knight of the Round Table, keeping his armor going with solar power. He is dubbed Sir Anthony, Man of Iron, and when Arthur is felled in battle by Mordred, he names him as his successor, so he gets to be king. Not bad, Tony, not bad. Number 9. What if Iron Man had been a traitor? From positive Tony to negative Tony. The people needed to know, again, they just need it. This tale comes to us from 1988, and spins a tale wherein Tony's origin starts off the same, shrapnel in the heart and all that. But in this world, Dr. Yinsen didn't buy Tony enough time to finish his armor, and he was kept by his communist captors. He is then wired with an explosive by Chen Lu, who states that if he doesn't betray his country, they will stop his heart. Not just stop it, they're gonna blow it up. As this Tony hasn't gone through his heroic arc, he agrees, and becomes Iron Man, but as a communist spy. He is eventually defeated by the Fantastic Four, and yes, his heart explodes. And so he needs to be kept on life support, until artificial hearts are invented, or until Reed feels like making him one, which in this universe will probably be never. Number 8. What if the Kingpin owned Daredevil? This is from What If Volume 2, number 73 in 1995. So in this world, after Jack Murdock is killed, Fisk, in a rare show of humanity, takes in Matt Murdock as he felt the Fixer overstepped his boundaries. He then eliminates all the people who had anything to do with it, binding Matt to him forever. Matt still grows up to be a lawyer, but he retains his good core, which is why when Kingpin is murdered and he ultimately is handed the keys to the criminal kingdom, he takes them, but descends into a life of sadness. Dark, 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 dark. Let's perk up for number 7. What if Invisible Girl of the Fantastic Four married the Submariner? Yes, that's the whole title, it's a mouthful. Can I just say that I've been waiting for this? I want it right now. Just Reed Richards is a bad husband, really terrible, and then Marvel broke up literally every marriage except for theirs. Anyway, 1980 brought us this, but I might also add it has the subheading Decline and Fall. This is actually a continuation of What If number 1, where Spider-Man joined and Sue left, the Fantastic Four that is. So in this, Reed is a bitter ex, just the bitterest of exes. Sue and Namor are doing great, and she sends him over to invite her friends to visit. So while all this is going on, Reed doctors a conversation between him and Namor to make it sound like Atlantis is preparing to attack. He attempts to send this to the UN, but Ben stops him. So then him and Johnny go and try to invade Atlantis. So Reed is just the worst. Never forget his council of evil Reeds. They nearly destroyed reality, which he also kept a secret from Sue. You cannot convince me she's not having an affair with Namor right now. This instant. Let me have this. Number 6. What if Rogue possessed the power of Thor? So this goes about how you think it would. During a battle, Rogue absorbs all of Thor's powers. All of them. She uses these powers to defeat the Avengers and even kills Iron Man and Vision. This is evil Rogue, by the way. A grief-stricken Odin sends a squad to try and take out Rogue, but just ends up killing the Blob, Pyro, and Mystique instead. Riddled by guilt, Rogue is seduced by Loki, who takes her to Asgard to kill Odin so he can take over the Earth. However, with some help from astral plane Thor, Rogue realizes she needs to embrace her new powers and her new role as Goddess of Thunder. So she returns to Earth to defend it. Solid story. Into it. Number 5. What if Doctor Doom had become a hero? This keeps us in line with the trend of villains becoming heroes, though in Rogue's case, that actually happened. This story comes from the year 1980 and begins with Victor actually taking Reed's advice, so he never has the accident that sends him on his villainous spiral. His experiment succeeds, but he still has to leave to seek out Mephisto to attempt to free his mother's soul. He saves her and sets out to become a hero in his land of Latveria. However, he is still egotistical, and ultimately this prevents him from making a key heroic sacrifice that leads to the loss of his love's soul. I'm telling you, stay away from Mephisto. Just don't do it. It's not worth it. Number 4. What if J. Jonah Jameson adopted Spider-Man? Yes, you heard that right. He adopts a teenage Peter Parker too. Let me explain. So in this universe, the rocket that is meant to send Jameson's son into space explodes and kills Aunt May, who was a spectator in the process, which devastates Peter. He was there and he tried to save her, but he couldn't, though he did save many others. Jameson sees him there and decides to adopt him so they can heal together. However, when webbing is found at the scene, he becomes convinced that Spider-Man caused the crash, because he's a menace. However, Peter is ultimately able to convince him that he's wrong by revealing his identity to him, and Jonah Jameson gets a cool robot suit and fights crime alongside him. Father and son duo. Plus, no more slanderous articles. Hooray! It's a win-win. Number 3. What if Conan the Barbarian were stranded in the 20th century? So Marvel has a thing about what if stories with Conan, or rather they did. Conan's not in high demand like he was back in 1984. So this piggybacks off of the story where Conan was transported to New York, but eventually gets sent back. In this story, he doesn't. He's trapped in the past, and not understanding our ways, he quickly becomes a criminal. A pimp, in fact. With a pet leopard, just going full Scarface. He also formed a gang, but is ultimately taken down by Captain America. Captain America manages to convince him to give up his life of crime, and even offers him a spot in the Avengers, because of course he does. Like I said in the worst Avengers vid, anyone, just anyone. Number 2. What if? X-Men Wedding Album. If you were ever burning to know what would happen if Jean Grey married Scott earlier, or didn't fall in love with him at all, or married Wolverine, well, wonder no more. This What If compilation is for you. All the answers to your fanfic AU and what if romance stories are here. And yes, Professor X is crying on the cover. Never forget when the X-Men were first conceived, he was in love with Jean too. It was a different time. In all seriousness, these are fun. In the first one, Scott and Jean even get to live a happy, normal life, and their love ends up being the catalyst for mutant acceptance in society. Take that, Charles and Eric. All it took was a tell-all book called America's Opening Heart, The Growing Acceptance of Mutants in Society. I'm always a sucker for these, what can I say? And finally, in at number 1, what if Spider-Man became a murderer? Say it ain't so. Who am I kidding? Peter lets people die all the time. Granted, it's by accident, but still. So in this story, a rage-stricken Peter kills his uncle's killer. He panics and tries to resuscitate him, which means a homeless man sees him, so yup, Jameson hears about it, and those become the news stories. Peter still tries to be a hero and take on the Sandman, but is so thrown that the villain is actually defeated by Flash Thompson. Spidey quits for a while and becomes Kurt Connors' aka the Lizard's lab assistant. He ends up defeating the Lizard, but hold on, this whole issue is narrated from Peter's prison cell. He turned himself in and was found guilty of manslaughter. He insisted on doing time even though they wanted to suspend his sentence. After 2 years, they release him on parole. He goes out to meet Aunt May, who has a new Spider-Man costume waiting for him. That's super depressing. Why did I put this at number 1?
Starting us off in at number 10, what if Thanos joined the Avengers? Let's begin our list with something a little topical. While what ifs are going through the minds of millions of people excited to see the upcoming Avengers Endgame film, we're fairly certain that this particular what if hasn't translated into a fan theory about how the drama will play out. Enter what if Thanos joined the Avengers? Lols. It'd solve a lot of problems in the MCU right now, wouldn't it? Or create a bunch of problems. Anywho, this storyline comes from one of the more recent what if issues out there, What If Infinity, which explores a bunch of Infinity event related topics. Thanos dons a Captain America uniform, and during the Infinity storyline, he joins Earth's forces against the Builders rather than using that conflict to take advantage of Earth and go after the planet himself. But that doesn't mean that there's a happy ending. Thanos ends up helping the Avengers defeat the Builders much quicker, and still ends up domineering in classic Thanos behavior. Up next, number 9, World War II in space. For starters, the concept of World War II happening in outer space is flat out ridiculous. Here we have Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos going around smoking cigars, in their spacesuits of course, like literally in their space helmet. That's like not good for oxygen, guys, FYI. It's full 1970s sci-fi glory, friends. Now to be fair, this issue dropped shortly after the release of the first Star Wars film, so you can kind of see why Marvel would jump on that bandwagon. So what was the logic behind this story? Well, it took place in a reality where Leonardo da Vinci's flying machine designs went to production early, and therefore accelerated Earth's technological advancement, leading to World War II to be fought in space. Fury and his crew fight evil space lizards and Terran traitors on his space station. It's a standalone issue, of course. Up next, number 8, The Blob's Demise. The Blob, aka Frederick J. Fred Dukes, first appeared on the pages of the X-Men issue 3 back in 1964, created by the Dream Team duo of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Now the concept behind him is quite simple. He's huge, and has mutant powers that give him superhuman strength, endurance, durability, resilience, and near impenetrable skin. He also has his own personal gravity field. How fancy. Anywho, in 1993, in What If the Hulk Killed Wolverine, this story featured the Grey Hulk going on a rampage and murdering Wolverine, which ultimately led to him being challenged by the other X-Men. He slaughters a bunch of them, and then comes across none other than the Blob. While fighting Pyro, who shoots flames at the Hulk, Hulk grabs the Blob, and uses him as a human shield to defend himself from the fire. Naturally, this burns the Blob alive, and results in Hulk tossing Blob's corpse onto Pyro. Not so immovable now, are you, Blob? It's kinda dark. In at number 7, The Monstrous Four. This little story came to us in the 1990 issue of What If the Fantastic Four all had the same power? We get to see the Fantastic Four in a slew of different iterations, one being in which they all became horribly deformed monsters, with Ben just still being the same regular version of the Thing, which is like kind of insulting a little bit. Reed becomes a purple version of the Hulk, Johnny becomes the original gross mushy version of the Thing, and Sue, well, her transformation is the worst. She turns into Man-Thing. For context, this is Man-Thing. Or technically I guess she's the Invisible Woman Thing, which kinda maybe makes it a little bit easier to be that hideous. Ugh. Anywho, she can't speak, she just gestures and cries and everyone freaks out about it. And then Reed makes the call that they're all too hideous to ever leave Monster Isle. On a less depressing note, in at number 6, Hall Monitor Frank Castle. Appearing in What If Volume 2 issue 34 from 1992, this story is as comical as you'd think. Frank Castle is a hall monitor at a school of superpowered human beings. As you can imagine, showing mercy to his fellow students isn't something that he does willingly. It's also been criticized for not being the most well-written what if on the block. Perhaps the best takeaway from this storyline is how many of its panels are absolutely wonderful when taken out of context. Like this one, of Frank Castle shouting, "Hall pass?" while firing off a little hand cannon. Yeah, maybe not the most sensitive in this current social landscape, now is it? On a less depressing note, this story takes place on Earth 89110, which is also the same Earth in which the Hulk became a high school hall monitor. Not sure if I'd want to go to school on that Earth. That's for sure. Moving on to number 5, What If Dr. Doom was a pediatrician? Need I say more? Yikes. This story also appeared in the same issue as Frank Castle Hall Monitor, but is a wee bit more absurd. Doom would treat his child patients with torture devices. Cause that makes sense, Dr. Doom. Moving on. And at 4, Dazzler as Galactus's Herald. Oh, Dazzler. While Girl is getting her own animated series on Disney's streaming service and will surely become a beloved character because of it, well, hopefully, Back in the day, the character was often seen as quite the joke. Created back in 1978 as a cross-promotion with Marvel and Casablanca Records, she was a singing superhero who could convert sound light into beams of various forms and intensity. She was also a highly accomplished roller skater, so, you know, easy to make fun of. Anywho, Marvel kinda rolled with that, no pun intended, and put together this hilarious what if, in which our girl Dazzler took Silver Surfer's place, only to realize that she's not really up for the gig since she's having a hell of a time coming to terms with the fact that she needs to find planets for Galactus to consume. She also develops a big old romantic crush on him. As you can imagine, doesn't really pan out too great, and made readers feel that this story was particularly groan-worthy. And at number 3, 1,000 Hulks. I don't know about you guys, but the idea of 1,000 Hulks running around on Earth is like not something I'd ever really want to see in real life or in the panels. Hulk is super OP. It would be utterly terrifying. Such was the case in this story. What if the Gamma Bomb spawned 1,000 Hulks? Now the title of this issue is slightly misleading. The Hulks don't spawn from the Gamma Bomb, but rather are birthed from the radiation from the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki at the end of World War II. This event spawns a ton of Hulks that Bruce Banner then studies, and then these Japanese Hulks end up taking over the US for 40 years. Nick Fury eventually rallies all of the other heroes to fight back, and the end is super ambiguous, never really revealing the outcome of this conflict. Just know that there's a lot of Hulks. And at number 2, you are Spider-Man. Nothing like a bit of meta fourth wall breaking to spice up a story. Am I right, Deadpool fans? Well, in this case, not so much. Compared to other comical what-if issues, this one actively makes fun of the reader, and even has a page in which the comic tries to encourage you to paste your own picture of your face over top of Spider-Man's. And the outcome? Well, the cover gives it away. All of Spidey's enemies stand over your grave laughing at you. Because being a hero is hard work, you guys. And finally, in at number 1, Gender Swap. While this one may be one of the smaller stories to ever appear in a what if comic, it's literally just a panel, it's perhaps one of the funniest what ifs that Marvel has ever published. Why? Well, back in the day, Stan Lee had a wee bit of a grudge over the fact that in 1976, DC Comics came out with a character named Power Girl. In 1978, he said, I quote, "I'm pretty annoyed about that. I've got to ask the Marvel lawyer. She's supposed to be starting a lawsuit about that and I haven't heard anything. I don't like the idea. You know, a year ago we brought out Wonder Man and DC Comics sued us because they had Wonder Woman and I said, okay, I'll discontinue Wonder Man. And all of a sudden they've got Power Girl. Oh boy, how unfair." But back to the panel now. It reads, "What if Wonder Man were a woman and Power Man were a girl?" This along with a fun little caption that read, "Dear Marvel, our lawyers advise you not to print this gag. With love, your distinguished competition." Distinguished competition, aka DC, aka DC Comics. See what they did there? Looks like Stan never really got over that one, did he? Number 10. What if Aunt May was a mutant with claws? I just love how this is posed as a scenario where Aunt May just uses her claws in place of the good old-fashioned parental guilt trip. Aunt May is having dinner with her nephew Peter and his girlfriend Mary Jane. She cooked for them and they immensely enjoyed their meal, but when she offers them a pie for dessert, they both insist they're just too full and they cannot eat another bite. They offer that after their date, they're going to see a show, they might have a slice upon their return. But this isn't good enough for Aunt May. Fortunately, in this story she has Wolverine claws which she snicks out and uses to intimidate the youngsters into postponing their date so they can stay for dessert. She uses her claws, of course, to also slice the pie, because Aunt May. What else is she gonna use them for? Although I would really love an alternate world where Aunt May just was Wolverine. Or I was posing earlier an idea of an alternate world where everyone is Aunt May. What about that world? Number 9. What if Iron Man, demon in an armor? Remember that time Tony Stark and Victor Von Doom swapped bodies? Oh yeah, that's the thing that happened in this What If special out of 2010. Here both brilliant minds were roommates in college and Victor used a machine on Stark to swap minds with him. Stark's memories were also wiped, so he never knew he had been Tony Stark. Victor, as Tony, used his millions to create his own inventions, but ultimately ended up ruining the Stark name with less than noble pursuits and his own greed. On the other hand, Stark as Victor succumbed to alcoholism but recovered and then created Doom Industries, a brilliant company responsible for its own Doom armor suits and technological advancements. In the end, Doom in Stark's body attempted to attack Doom Industries but was apprehended by Stark in Doom's body. He then revealed the swap that had taken place years earlier and bargained to swap back in exchange for his freedom, but Stark in Doom's body is just like, nah thanks, I kinda have the better company and life now in your body. I like this body. Why would I want to be Tony now when I can just be the honorable Dr. Doom? Good point. Good point. Why would you ever want to be Tony Stark when you could be Dr. Doom? That's the real question. That'd be awesome. Number 8. What if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? This story offers a glimpse into an alternate reality where World War II was fought in space? This story takes place in an alternate reality where instead of being divided by eastern and western fronts, the battle is divided between beta and alpha sectors. As such, we get to see Sergeant Nick Fury fighting alongside the Howling Commandos in outer space, smoking a cigar even while wearing a space helmet. Seems like a bad idea, but it's Nick Fury, so that's what he's gonna do. It's also explained that we have Da Vinci's inventions to thank for this early technological advancement, which led to us getting to outer space in the 1940s, which is maybe the best bit of exposition explanation in the book, and just in general that I've read. It's pretty ridiculous. Oh, and of course we also get to watch our heroes fight aliens, because space. Number 7. What if the world knew Daredevil was blind? Yeah, this is a weird story, especially because it kind of implies that if Daredevil wasn't blind and didn't have superpowers, his life would actually be better or easier. As though, like, you know, if you're blind, your life is going to be terrible, but if you're not blind, your life is great, which I don't think is true. That's not how that works. I mean, he's also still got an enemy in Wilson Fisk, I'd assume, so I just feel like this is a big oversimplification. In this story, the world finds out that Daredevil is blind, and as a result, those close to him begin to piece together that Daredevil is in fact Matt Murdock, because, you know, Matt Murdock is blind. Get it? He then ends up having his sight restored via an operation, unmasks, and lives happily ever after with Karen, trading his heroic initials of DD for DA and becoming the new district attorney of New York. He's swapping it out. I also love how Karen's like, oh, thank goodness you're not a superhero, now we can get married. Number 6. What if Black Bolt talked in his sleep? This is a very short story, and I think you can imagine how it ends if you are familiar with the Inhuman King known as Black Bolt, but it's also just very humorously written. You can find this single-page story near the back of issue 9 of What If Volume Number 2. Apparently when Black Bolt eats pineapple pizza before bed, it has disastrous consequences. Also, good to know what kind of pizza Black Bolt likes. I personally also love pineapple on my pizza, but I feel like that just lets you know if someone's cool or not. Oh, the strange things that you learn about people and pizza. If Black Bolt talked in his sleep all the time, the Inhumans would have a lot of rebuilding to do all the time. I also just like how resigned some of these Inhumans are in that last panel. Like, oh, he did it again. I guess I'm just gonna sleep on some rubble for the rest of the night. That's just how it is. Shucks. And only Medusa is the one that's mad. She's like, baby, I told you not to eat that pizza. This always happens. Number 5. What if Wolverine had a styrofoam skeleton? Issue 100 is just one of the best for some real weird stories. One of the stories it offers us is only told through a mock-up cover, but it's so good it's just gotta be mentioned because the cover is just too good. It also is presented beside another great mock-up cover offering an alternate story where Peter Parker became Sheep Boy instead of Spider-Man. Sheep Boy, I love it. In the Wolverine mock-up, we're offered an alternate Logan who goes by the codename Wolverwimp. He is cowering on the front cover, about to have his styrofoam skeleton ripped out by Maggie Nito, a mean little girl. I also just love the reference to Wolverine also losing his nose when he lost his adamantium that's on there. Mock-up what if stories are actually the best. I wish we got a full story of this. Someone write that, please. Number 4. What if Iron Man was trapped in the time of King Arthur? The craziest thing about this what if is that it's actually kind of an alternate retelling of a real-life main continuity story where Iron Man was transported to Camelot in medieval times with Dr. Doom and managed to escape. Although this story offers the alternative of, you know, what if he wasn't able to escape and only Dr. Doom got out? You can find it in What If Volume 1, Issue 33. The answer to the question is that Iron Man would be drained of energy, get frustrated in realizing that, you know, he couldn't rebuild a time machine, and ends up becoming Sir Anthony of Iron, an Iron Knight at King Arthur's Round Table. In fact, he uses his suit to help protect the realm from the evil Morgana, defeating her, but in the ensuing battle is unable to prevent King Arthur from becoming mortally wounded. With his dying breath, Arthur makes Sir Anthony his successor, even though they kinda just met, but it's fine I guess. Which means that the Anthony of Iron Man's past, his past self from the future, would probably be really weirded out if he ever read any stories of Camelot. He'd be like, Sir Anthony of Iron became the king. Wait, I'm Iron Man. What? Maybe that was actually his inspiration in the alternate reality to create the Iron Man suit. and now Tony's just stuck in like a time loop. Number 3. What if Wolverine was the Lord of Vampires? In this story, Wolverine becomes the new Lord of Vampires, which is kinda weird considering what we know of Wolverine's healing factor now, but this is also obviously an alternate reality and a story that was written in the 90s, so there's that. Here Wolverine is transformed into a vampire by Dracula. It also features a sweet vampire hunter version of Punisher, who is sporting Doctor Strange's cape, and I personally think that the Punisher looks amazing in that cape. So lavish, I just want him to wear capes all the time now. In the end, Punisher is defeated, but Wolverine has a crisis of conscience and ends up flipping to the side of good once more, killing himself and all the other vampire supes and villains he'd made at the same time. And for some reason, Doc Ock's body and tentacles turn to dust. Now, shouldn't his tentacles be okay though? Because they're not made of his tissue. Also, I love when people are like, "You're dust," and all their clothes become dust. I'm like, shouldn't their clothes be fine? Anyways, it's a small technical thing, but it bothers me. Number 2. What if paper skin? Remember when we were talking about issue 100 of volume 2 of What If? Well, an actual story that is featured in there is called Paper Skin. It is honestly such a strange story. I need to share it with you. This is a what if story that seems to posit the question of what if Mr. Sinister could offer Gambit a cure for Rogue's powers. It's revealed in the story that Gambit has already betrayed the X-Men by bargaining with Sinister, offering important Cerebro files in exchange for what he wants. Although what Gambit wants is not actually for him, but is kind of for all mutant kind, a cure to the legacy virus. As he's about to leave after getting that cure, Sinister offers him something else that he simply can't resist. A cure for Rogue, his one true love, to help her control her powers. He agrees to steal one more thing for Sinister in exchange for the cure, a tithe box. Sinister has been searching for them and collecting them over the years. In the end, Rogue accepts the cure, but can't accept that Gambit has been helping Sinister, and so she kills him, taking his powers and also his looks seemingly, which is kind of weird. It's like Gambit with boobs, and I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this art, but okay. She goes after Sinister only to find the secret of what the boxes contained was Marvel Comics! Gasp. Now Sinister has so much information because he's been reading Marvel Comics. What a weird reality. What a meta reality. Number 1. What if Avengers vs. X-Men? In this bizarro story, Magneto helps to ensure that Hope ends up getting the Phoenix Force instead of it being split up into Iron Man by 5 parts, which possesses and creates the Phoenix 5. Magneto is seemingly helping Hope to control these new and awesome powers, but when she struggles and begins to turn dark, he suggests she give him some power to help her. In reality, Magneto kinda wants all the power for himself, which is just what he takes. This all happens in the last issue, by the way, of this 4-part what if story. And after Magneto takes the power, it gets pretty weird. Yeah, that's not where it ends. It just keeps going forever. He takes the power and is instantly corrupted by it. As such, Xavier somehow uses his powers to temporarily mess with Magneto's sight, despite the fact that Magneto was wearing his helmet, and then Wolverine snicks him through the eyes. This results in Magneto basically exploding, killing everyone on the planet, and destroying the Earth. Then Jean shows up randomly and just kinda reveals she saw all of this coming. She uses her Phoenix powers to fix the planet, bringing back plant and animal life, but not people for some reason. She says it's up to her and Wolverine as basically an Eve and an Adam of sorts to do that. She could have just brought all those people back, I'm pretty sure, because she's got the power of the Phoenix, but yeah, it's a weird one. It's a weird one.